Good morning. Happy Friday. Crazy to believe the week is over. And some people may still be asleep, tucked away, nestled in their beds after what might have been a raucous 4th of July. But welcome to the Russ Joy Show, episode number 2. We got a big show today. And as we did a couple days ago over on Tuesday, a lot to get into, bunch of different teams. If you look at the thumbnail, I don't know how much people pay attention to thumbnails on videos, but I'll just tell you right now, a lot to get into today. We're going to talk about the Phillies. Phillies-Braves kick off a massive, massive series today. I don't want to say that it's a make or break series. Certainly don't want to overinflate the importance of it. But, well, it's kind of do or die, in a sense, a little bit. And the Phillies are shorthanded, but it is a massive series. You at least have to show up in Atlanta. We'll get to that a little bit later on. Sixers made a couple of moves around the margins. We've seen how the rest of free agency is sort of played out. Not going to touch on the Sixers too much today. The Flyers, there was a point that I wanted to make the other day, and as I tend to do, I talked a lot about different things, and then I got off track. And so I wanted to offer some thoughts on a couple of the free agent signings that the Flyers have made. We'll get to that a little bit later on as well. Jürgen Klopp, who we talked about a little bit at the end of Tuesday's show, flirted with the United States of America, may have done a little bit of a wink and a nod to the U.S. fans. Also had former goalie Tim Howard pretty much volunteer himself to go abroad and to try to pitch Jürgen Klopp on taking over the team. Oh, and by the way, Saquon Barkley might be about to get in on a massive revenge tour. So a lot going on today, and I will go over to the questions, comments, and concerns a lot. You know, on Tuesday, I was on time, which, as some people might know, is not the most common thing with me. And so today, I told my family. I woke up a little bit later today. The kids actually slept in a bit, and I was like, all right, just have to get downstairs, make sure I have everything ready. I'm going to go live right at 8 o'clock. And then I had 2 kids melting down. We had one that had to go off to daycare, and all I could think was, it's great. Second episode, and we're already off of our time. And then I had an issue trying to get Instagram Live up and running, but we're good now. So this show, depending on where you find it, and many of you found it, I will tell you a surprising number of you found it between the Joy Media LLC page and the at the Russ Joy on YouTube. Both of those channels, there's a nice number there, a nice number over on Twitter, where you can follow me at Joy on Broad. You can follow the show at the Russ Joy Show. The podcast feed was nice. I have to say, I don't know why so many of you decided to listen. I hope that many of the people who did will continue to listen. Today's a pretty loaded day. Not only do I have this, but then Crossing Broadcast, apparently, instead of doing it on Thursday, on the 4th of July, Kevin Kincaid said, no, we're going to do it Friday. So got that coming up at noon. So you can spend some time with me here, go off, have your breakfast, get your work day started, and then you can go back and go follow that show later on today. And apparently there's a big interview that Kincaid did, so there's your little tease for later. I don't think I could say publicly who the guest is yet, but it was somebody pretty big. He had Hilferty a few weeks ago from the Flyers side, from Comcast Spectacor, and then he's got somebody pretty big from another team in town, and it may be the Sixers. But I would never tell you that ahead of time because I don't know if I had clearance to do it. But I'll go over to the questions, comments, and concerns over on YouTube, X, and Facebook, and I'll let you know this. If you're watching on X and you want your comments to show up, there is a slightly annoying thing that you have to do. If you just reply to the video in your feed, I won't see your comment. And it happened to somebody the other day who sent like 6 or 7 tweets my way. I didn't see any of them. If you're on X, you have to click on the video. Almost go like the old way that Periscope used to exist, where you click on the video and you can see like the running thing if people are sending the hearts or whatever. If you leave a comment there, once you click on the video and interact with the video, I'll see your comments. So if you're watching on X and you have thoughts today, by all means, that's the way to do it. Now, I will go over to YouTube really quickly. Former student of mine, Josh White, who follows all these shows that I do. Maybe he has some kind of insanity because I was his teacher for a bit, but says, wake up, it's the best time of the week, the Russ Joy Show. Thanks, Josh. All right, let's get into what's going on in Philly sports and beyond today as we get ready for the weekend. And I want to know in the comments today, how was your 4th of July? What did you do on the 4th of July? I've found that over the years, our entire existence, everything that we do on the 4th, has so fundamentally changed. And I had this moment. Let me do this really quick before we get into the sports today. I remember as a kid. Now, granted, I grew up in a very different area as a kid, Coleridge and Schuylkill County. I remember on the 4th of July going out to visit my baba in Branchdale. If you happen to know where Branchdale is, congratulations. You are a lost soul like me. But I remember going out there and there was like a little parade, because this is a very small town. I don't even have a comp. If you're in the Philly area, I don't even know what to compare it to. It's like a tiny little township within a township that probably had like 400 people living there. I don't know what the comp is. But I remember going there and there's like a little parade and you would like dress up in your red, white, and blue. And it was pretty much like the whole town was part of the parade or something. I don't know. But I remember like going to a memorial thing and they would do a thing for the troops. And I don't know what it was. I just remember feeling like as a little kid, there was a lot of America stuff. There was a lot of like patriotism. And again, it was a very different area. It's a super, super conservative area. So maybe that was it. But like trying to figure out what to do with our kids for the 4th of July every year has been like kind of a mess. I remember a few years ago, we went to the Skip Act Parade, which was great. It was just very hot. And yesterday, we did a bunch of stuff. We went to the pool, went to a neighbor's pool, had some friends over. It was great. But I just remember thinking, like, there's nothing that I can find in my general area that gave me the same feeling of the kind of things, the small town things that we did as a kid. So I don't know. Maybe it's just me. If it is, let me know. And if not, you can also let me know. Andrew Fawcett checks in over on YouTube and says, made himself a giant steak and watched Generation Kill again to drown out the fireworks in the neighborhood. A lot of people complain about the fireworks. I don't totally understand. I don't know where we have gone as a society where everybody hates fireworks, or so many people hate fireworks. Now, I will say, if you're in the military and you have PTSD and that triggers you, by all means, you are the exception. I have no problem with you. By all means, you can not like the fireworks. But aside from that, like, I don't know what we're doing. The amount of people that I see posting on community groups about their dogs and how their dogs hate the fireworks, maybe it's just because I was a kid. I remember having a dog. My dog didn't like the fireworks either. We would take care of our dog. We might take our dog somewhere away from the fireworks, and like everything was hunky-dory. But it feels like so many people now are just like, poor little Fido. We put him in his little stress jacket. We have to drive him 10 miles away, and then we have to wait, and then people are setting off fireworks on the 4th of July. The horror. I'm like, I don't know what we're doing. Andrew Fawcett says that in Texas, they go a little bit crazy. It's like little Baghdad. All right. When I used to live in Phoenixville, I remember there being a lot of fireworks around the clock. We lived in Royersford for a while, and Royersford, like, I don't think those people needed any excuse for there to be fireworks. It was like in the middle of the day, you would hear fireworks. And it didn't even have to be the 4th of July. Like some nights at like 2 a.m, you would just hear a bang and you knew it wasn't a gunshot. It was just a firework. Somebody had a reason to set off a firework. I don't know. I actually enjoy fireworks. I think they're great. Kyle checks in and says, Waltz's fireworks is the only thing that goes on down there. That is true. Waltz's golf farm, they have a massive, massive fireworks display. Today's the 5th. Phoenixville has their fireworks tonight. They always do it the day after. So maybe we'll go to the Phoenixville fireworks. If you're going to go, let me know. Maybe we'll meet up. Probably not, but maybe. There's somebody who keeps DMing me on Twitter that they want to go get a Gazzo's cheesesteak in Pottstown. So maybe we'll meet up and go to the fireworks. All right, anyway. That was the 4th of July. Let's talk about some other stuff. And I see people checking in over on Instagram Live. The one downside of Instagram Live is I can't pull your comments up on the screen, but I'll acknowledge you as we go here. So, Saquon Barkley. The big thing coming into the offseason, if you were an Eagles fan, was deciding what the Eagles were going to do in the running back position. And I made this argument all last season that while DeAndre Swift was very good, he wasn't elite. And he wasn't the kind of next level back that you needed to take some additional pressure off of Jalen Hurts, to have a little bit of gravity in the backfield that could free up Hurts if he wanted to run. Now, I've also been on the record as saying I think Jalen Hurts got hurt around week 4 last year, tweaked his knee, never really looked like the same kind of dual threat quarterback that we've grown accustomed to him being. And that somewhere around, I think it was week 12, it looked like he tweaked it again. It looked like maybe he was making some progress. He was a little bit quicker, and then he got hurt again. And the Eagles didn't really make a comment about it. He didn't really complain about it. We saw a brace. I think it's pretty safe to say that Jalen Hurts spent much of last year hurt or at the very least hindered. And I'm not saying that if he had Saquon Barkley last year or a guy like Derrick Henry in the backfield last year, that it would have made a massive difference, because if your quarterback's hurt, he's hurt, right? If he doesn't have that first step, none of it matters. But while Swift was really good, I thought Swift was a very good second back. I thought that Swift could have been a really great option, kind of like if you go back to the Westbrook and Corral Buckhalter days, where you have a speedy guy who can be a dual threat out of the backfield, can maybe play a part in the receiving game. You felt good about DeAndre Swift, but you never really felt like he was a guy that you were going to give significant money to. He never felt like a guy that you could build an entire game plan around. So when this offseason began, I wanted to see the Eagles make a commitment at running back. The guy that I wanted was Derrick Henry, because I just think that Derrick Henry would have been the perfect embodiment of what Philly fans expect of an Eagle. A north-south runner, a guy who's happy to carry 3 or 4 defenders hanging on his legs, hanging off his back, hanging off his shoulders. I really like Derrick Henry. I have no idea how he's going to play outside of his comfort zone in Tennessee this year. He's with a new team. But Saquon Barkley was a guy that I never thought the Eagles were going to actually be able to go out and get. And I understand that there have been concerns. There have been injury concerns. There are concerns about when a running back hits a certain age that there's a significant drop-off, and it's a precipitous drop-off. You go from being a guy who's viewed as an every down back, who can be a 1,000-yard rusher, who could be a guy who gets into the end zone, double-digit times. And there were concerns about, what could Saquon Barkley be? And then when the Eagles kind of pulled off this coup, when Howie Roseman went out and acquired Saquon Barkley, well, there were some people who had a little bit of PTSD about a certain running back who came from another division rival years ago, and it did not work at all. And that, of course, was DeMarco Murray, a guy that everyone thought was going to work in the Chip Kelly system, and people really did believe was going to be a guy who could take some significant pressure off the quarterback. And everybody thought, and I certainly was one of those people that thought, you're just going to turn DeMarco Murray, allow him to be a north-south back, and let him go to work, let him eat. The Eagles did not do that. Now, with Saquon Barkley, it's pretty clear. We all know what he is. I would say that Saquon Barkley, when healthy, is a significantly better running back than DeMarco Murray ever was. The thing that you have to keep in mind is that while there were injury concerns around Barkley, if he can stay healthy, the type of pressure that's going to take off of Jalen Hurts in the backfield is tremendous. He's a better blocker than DeAndre Swift. He is certainly a more reliable every down back, which does allow you then to have your change of pace guy come in from time to time. But Barkley, you can hand it off to 3 times in a row on a given drive. I like the idea of what Saquon Barkley is going to bring to this offense. When it all happened, you had a lot of very hurt Giants fans, a lot of them. And the Giants fans felt betrayed by Saquon Barkley. They felt like Barkley turned his back on them, that he showed no loyalty. And what was interesting was there were questions about, well, what did the Giants actually want to offer him? Were the Giants even comfortable extending an offer to Barkley? Did they want him to go out and gauge the market? And did they want him to come back and they would have last right of refusal, that they would essentially say, hey, you've played your entire career here. We value you tremendously. Go see what the market is, come back, and we'll match it if we feel like we want to. Well, if you've missed this, and you may have around the holiday, HBO has this Hard Knocks show that went through the offseason instead of just training camp, and it's following the Giants. Now, I'm slightly afraid of playing a clip on YouTube because I'm pretty sure that if I play it even off a tweet, they're going to take the whole video down, which is not ideal. Now, if you're listening in the podcast feed, you don't care. If you're watching on X, you probably don't care. I do care about if the YouTube channel gets a strike, so I'm a little bit reluctant to do it. But what I will tell you is, if you haven't seen it yet, there are a bunch of clips from behind the scenes with the Giants where they're kind of pondering, what do we do with Barkley? Is he a guy that we can pay $12 million a year to? Is he a guy we can pay more to? What's the number they're comfortable at? And it was interesting because they had John Mara on, the GM's talking to the owner. The owner essentially says, I don't want to lose him. He's critical to what we do here. If I had my druthers, we wouldn't let him go. And kind of understood that the front office thought, there's a lot of money invested in the quarterback. $40 million to Daniel Jones, which continues to be a legitimate problem for the Giants fans. Whether they want to admit it publicly or not is an entirely different story. Depending on the week, you'll hear that he's the best quarterback in the division, and the rest of society that understands what he is understands that he's probably the third best quarterback in the division, sometimes the worst one in the division, but they're paying him $40 million. The owner says, I don't want to just let Saquon Barkley go. The front office has this idea of like, maybe we can trade him. Then there's another video where it's the entire collective. It's like 5 or 6 guys from the front office in the room together. And they're talking about like, what kind of value does this guy actually have? And what they keep coming back around to is, you don't want to offend him. You don't want to offend Barkley, who's spent his entire career playing for your team, by saying, we'll give you $6 million. But that was kind of where they valued him at. That's where they could kind of come to terms, at least internally, with how much they wanted to pay him. They had this idea of maybe trying to execute some sort of a trade, but then it was like, well, what are we actually getting back? Is it worth it? And then they had the decision that like we could just let him go, let him explore free agency, and have that conversation down the line of let's match. And the interesting thing is, if you were a Giants fan who felt betrayed by Saquon Barkley, who felt that this guy showed no loyalty to the team that drafted him, I would have to think that after watching all those clips, maybe if you're being honest with yourself, you have a moment to say, now I get why players are the way they are. Now I get why players seemingly have no loyalty, if that's what you want to call it, because at the same time, the teams are having these conversations about like undercutting a guy who is tremendously important. The Giants might have a decent enough receiving core. They have a bad offensive line. Their quarterback is vastly overpaid, but they made their bed and they have to lie in it. But they weren't having a massive conversation there about like, hey, let's try to see if he'll take 11. And if he doesn't, then we have to go. No, they're talking about paying him half the salary. So that was the thing. And it's always interesting to see like what a fan base is actually going to say, how they're going to react. And it looked like the reaction online was kind of mixed. But the thing that actually brings it back to Philly is A.J. Brown put out a tweet. And A.J. Brown's tweet was essentially, I saw the Saquon video, like the Giants talking about what they were going to offer him and his value and everything. And it was essentially like, I don't know you very well yet, Saquon, but I'm going to do whatever I can to make sure that you get yours. And for a guy who had been dogged unfairly, really unfairly, by some media in the city, by at least one radio station in the city, about is A.J. Brown a good teammate? Is he a guy who cares about his teammates? Does he actually want to be here? He's pretty much done everything he can to this point to prove that, like, yes, in fact, he does want to be here. Remember, he had that one hit that he did on WIP's afternoon show when it was Fritz and Ike Reese. This is after John Marks left, before Spike Eskin came in. And A.J. Brown called into the radio and had this, like, back and forth with Ike and with Jack, and was essentially like, I want to be here. I want to play here. I love it here. Love the fans. I don't know where this stuff comes from, that I don't want to be here, but I want to be here. He signed his extension. Everything was great. And yet some people in the media especially wanted to still run with the idea that, like, he's not actually happy here. Like, he took the money because of course he would, but, like, he doesn't actually want to be here. There's jealousy between him and Devontae Smith, all this crap. He's done an exceptional job of controlling his controllables, doing what he can do to try to, I guess, reassure the fan base, although I don't know if the fan base ever turned on him. I don't know if the fan base was ever actually the group most responsible for the narrative around him. But he's essentially tried to reassure the fans that, like, he wants to play here. He's committed to his teammates. He's spoken very positively about Jalen Hurts. He's spoken very well about Devontae Smith. He congratulated him when Devontae got his contract. And now he's talking to a new teammate, somebody that he was a division rival of for a year, who he has never actually played with in Saquon Barkley, and is saying, based on the disrespect that it looks like you were shown, I'm going all in. I'm all in to help you essentially prove the Giants wrong. And if you're an Eagles fan, you should feel really good about that. Now, I'm not one to tell you how you should feel all the time, but in this case, you should feel good about the chemistry that it appears is getting built behind the scenes. And the fact that it was like an affront, that A.J. Brown looked at it and said, you've now disrespected my new teammate, and we're going to do whatever we can to make him successful. Now, if you ask me honestly, what do I think Saquon Barkley is going to do this year? I have gone back and forth on it, and I'm going to throw over here to Nico really quick. Nico says the fans love AJ, and I agree. We'll get back to that in a second, though. But I do agree. I think that the fans love AJ, and I think a lot of this is media-driven, which sucks. When I look at what Saquon Barkley can do, and if you look at what Saquon Barkley has done over the last few years in his career, you'll know that he has not been able to stay healthy. It's been the number one concern. It's been the one problem that the Giants have really had with him. I think that there's a possibility here that he can get back to being a 1,000-yard rusher and maybe more. I think it's totally within the realm of possibility that you could see a guy who can he get to 1,300 yards like he did a couple of years ago? It's possible. Like if he plays 14 games for you this year, that's just under 100 yards a game, I think he can get back to being a 1,300-yard rusher. I don't know if you're ever going to see him get much further than that. I don't know if I'd want to actually bet on the idea of him doing like over 1,450. But if he can stay healthy, given the success that DeAndre Swift had behind this offensive line, one has to think that it's entirely possible Saquon could do very well and could actually benefit tremendously. Now, there are two things at play that could be a problem, and I'm sure we're going to break these down all summer, throughout training camp, even into the preseason and into the season. The Giants, part of their calculus of why they didn't bring him back is because they felt like they had to improve the offensive line, which is funny because in admitting that, it also admitted that Barkley wasn't given the best opportunity to be successful because if the guys in front of you can't block, there are no holes for you to run through. It changes the kind of back that Barkley is. That's neither here nor there. The one question that everyone has to have is what do the Eagles look like in the trenches without Jason Kelce? That is a mega issue. One has to think that because 4 of the other guys are going to be back at their natural positions, that the line is going to be fine. But when you lose the guy who's calling out all the coverages, who is calling out the blitzes, who has the responsibility Jason Kelce did, and who, by the way, has just done an exceptional job at that position, so much so that he's likely going to be a Hall of Famer, that is a critical position to have to change over. But if we can safely assume that Jeff Stoutland is able to get all that rectified and that there's not a massive drop-off at the center position, Barkley should be able to eat. And in theory, me saying, like, I can't imagine him going over 1,450, if he plays 15 games, 16 games, well, it is possible that he could go that high. It's possible that he could set a career record for rushing yards. But we don't know, and we won't know until the season gets underway and until we see what the offensive line actually looks like. So it's going to be a bit until we know. I do like to think that I'm going to be a little bit bullish on Barkley, and I do think that he's ultimately going to make the Giants pay for letting him go. And not only letting him go, but letting him go to a division rival. Kyle says over on YouTube, he should get around 18 to 20 touches a game with the rest of the offense. He hopefully won't need to do much heavy lifting until the playoffs. You know, there is a thought out there of like, if he doesn't need to be an every down back, which with this offense, he might not have to be. He legitimately might not have to be an every down back. You're not load managing him because you certainly aren't paying him to be a guy who is load managed. But Kyle could be right. If the idea is get him 18 to 20 touches a game, whether that's handing the ball off to him or getting him involved in the passing game, doesn't matter. Get him that many touches, load manage him to a point, make sure he doesn't get hurt, or at least try to manage that he doesn't get hurt. Do your best. You can't prevent injuries in this league. You can try to mitigate the chances of them getting worse. That could be a good call. And like maybe it is, just keep him as fresh as you can throughout the season so that when the playoffs come, he's got fresh legs. He doesn't have a vast playoff experience because he played for the godforsaken New York Giants. So he will, in theory, be playing a much longer season. And if all goes according to plan, there is a case to be made. If the Eagles play the way that the Eagles can play, they could be in contention for the top spot in the NFC. They could be fighting for home field advantage. It's entirely possible that if they don't make it into the home field advantage conversation, that they could pretty decidedly win this division, have a playoff spot locked up, and then, all right, week 17, you don't worry about it. Or your 17th game, you don't worry about what happens. You don't have to panic. You can sit some of your starters. Maybe that gives him an extra week to get his legs right. It's very interesting. Andrew Fawcett agrees, by the way. The wear and tear on him could be real, but it'll be limited based on the other weapons available. You think about it. This is like, as an Eagles fan, this is where you should get really excited, right? You have Jalen Hurts with a chip on his shoulder. And it's not the chip on his shoulder of, is he really the guy to be the number one quarterback? Did the Eagles make a mistake by letting Carson Wentz go? Or did the Eagles make a mistake by not bringing back Nick Foles? Did they make a mistake by handing the reins over? It's not that kind of chip on his shoulder. It's knowing that 2 years ago, he was the runner-up for MVP. He played a sensational Super Bowl. He had that chip on his shoulder going into last year that he fumbled and it went back for a touchdown against the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. That seemed to be the thing that motivated him to get better. And like I said, I think he got hurt so early in last season, and so much of the offense and the pressure of the team and their success was tied directly to him that he tried to gut it out. And I think that while he might have made some strides throughout the season, I do think he got hurt again. He goes into this season with a different kind of chip on his shoulder. There are a lot of doubters out there. There are doubters in this town about what Jalen Hurts is. And did the Eagles overreact again? Did Howie Roseman overreact again by giving him a massive contract before he needed to, just like he did with Carson Wentz? There have been concerns. There have been questions. I oddly enough, am not concerned. And it's not because I think that Jalen Hurts is this super, super, super elite quarterback. I'm not putting him on the level of Patrick Mahomes, not putting him even on the level of what we saw a year ago from Lamar Jackson. I'm putting him on this tier of he's surrounded by so many great weapons, and he has such an elite line in front of him that he doesn't have to try to turn chicken shit into chicken salad. He can just go out there and play his game. He's got arguably the best wide receiver duo on the outside, unless you want to play the Waddle and Hill game in Miami. I would argue that they are a very balanced pair of outside wideouts. You've got one of the best tight ends in the game in Dallas Goedert. And if healthy, you have one of the most impactful running backs now in your backfield. Is there a case to be made? And let me know in the comments, because sometimes I wonder if I'm overrating it. Is Saquon Barkley, when healthy, even at this stage in his career, given his age and given the years on his legs, is he the most talented running back this team has had since LaShawn McCoy? Is he better than what LaShawn McCoy was? Do we go back to Brian Westbrook? Do we go farther back? Let me know. Again, I'm bullish on what I think Saquon Barkley can be. And I think that there is a reason to have a lot of optimism. I fully expect Saquon Barkley will see those videos, if he hasn't already, that came out of Hard Knocks, and he's going to have a new fire lit. It's one thing to think that you were being not necessarily trash talked by your own organization, but to hear the level of, we think he's only worth $6 million, but we don't want to offend him, but that's really what we're comfortable paying him. That has to light a motivation. I think as a pro athlete, if you're a good pro athlete, or if you're a great pro athlete who wants to be elite, there's that intrinsic motivation. You are motivated within. But it always helps to have a little bit of that extrinsic motivation, to have a little bit of motivation that comes from other places. In this case, it could be what was said on Hard Knocks. Nico over on YouTube says Saquon is going to be electric if he's healthy. Andrew Fawcett thinks that Barkley already knew what was said. That's why he's an Eagle now. Landros says, yes, Barkley is a stud. Behind this O-line, the sky is the limit. And Landros actually brought up another good point here, too, that I want to get to. Maybe it'll depend on the game plan. We were talking about the touches before. How many touches per game? Maybe it'll be different under Kellen Moore. As far as how the game plan looks, do we know? I am always so reluctant to put any stock into what the reporters see at mini camps, at voluntary OTAs. I'm even like a little bit skeptical about what they see in reported training camp. Like if you're new and you haven't followed me this whole time and you have no idea what to expect from me on any given day, I despise the play-by-play that we get out of training camp. I actively loathe it, okay? Like when I see my Twitter feed get blown up with 6 or 7 beat reporters saying, Devontae Smith drops a pass from Jalen Hurts, and then they're tracking how many drop passes a receiver has on a given day. Or they try to make a huge talking point out of like if Jalen Hurts was inaccurate because of a bad day at practice. That kind of stuff drives me nuts. Now, radio stations love it because it gives them fodder. It gives them something to talk about. It certainly gives them something more pressing, more relevant, I guess, to them, and certainly more current than like taking a Jalen Hurts quote from 2 weeks ago out of context and then running with it for 10, 11 days. All this is to say, I think that the Eagles are in good position, and I do think it's going to be interesting to see what Kellen Moore is going to do and how he's going to scheme Saquon Barkley into this offense. So we'll see. Now, there are a few other things that I wanted to get to today. One of them, very notably, is the Phillies and the Braves have a series coming up. It starts tonight, and based on probable pitchers that I have seen, Aaron Nola will be on the mound for the Phillies. Now, again, for those of you who don't know, I'm not the biggest Aaron Nola believer. I think that the Phillies very clearly last offseason wanted to go out and find another top-of-the-rotation starter because they knew that Zach Wheeler is their one true ace and that they thought they needed another number 1, 1A, number 2 starter because Aaron Nola is a guy who can eat innings. Aaron Nola is a guy who, in his arm, has ace stuff, but up here seems to just get thrown off from time to time. And so I've always been kind of critical about what exactly is Aaron Nola going to be and what can he be for you and what is his upside. And I come back to this because Yamamoto is a guy that the Phillies went after hard. And there are some who have murmured behind the scenes that the Phillies actually had a bigger offer out to Yamamoto than the Dodgers ended up offering and then he agreed to. And if you think about it, he's a young pitcher, yes. And you could think that like he not only fits the short term, but the long-term vision of the team. That's entirely fair, and it's a fair point to make. I do once again say that I think that that was an indication that the Phillies were aware they needed another top-end guy. Now, all of this goes without saying, like we can have this moment. Ranger Suarez has been sensational this year. Christopher Sanchez, not including last night, has been very good this year. He was the reigning pitcher of the month. Like, they've had some great performances. I've been a big Spencer Turnbull guy, a Turnbull truther the entire season, very upset about what happened to him, the fact that he was doing so well in the rotation. Taijuan Walker came back. He was your big money signing a year ago, and so you felt the need to try to shove him into the rotation, even though I don't think he had earned it. Taijuan Walker implodes a bunch of times. Taijuan Walker kind of takes everybody on the Taijuan Walker journey. He looks like your worst starter. He really does look like your fifth starter by a significant margin because of the emergence of Ranger Suarez and Christopher Sanchez. And then Nola had his head on pretty straight for most of the season. Wheeler is your ace. Everything was hunky-dory. And then when Walker finally went down, they said, all right, we're going to go to Turnbull. And I got myself excited because I'm like, good. The man earned his spot. And then he got hurt, 3 innings into a start, and he's been on the IL ever since. And it's a shame. I think jerking him around between being in the rotation and the bullpen probably messed him up. He's had some injury concerns before. There was the thought going into this year that he'd have an innings limit, all that. I still think that when he is healthy, I would like to see Spencer Turnbull in the rotation. I would be happy if I never had to watch Taijuan Walker pitch another game in red pinstripes. I'm sure they'll probably figure out a way to get him back in the rotation. I don't want to see it. I do not want to see it at all. But the Phillies have this huge series coming up against the Braves. It starts on Friday nights. If you're listening on Friday or watching on Friday, you'll know. It starts today. We have Aaron Nola on the mound for the Phillies. And it's a huge series. And I know that like a lot of times with sports talk radio, they go very hyperbolic and they say everything is a must win. And that you can't lose this series. And that if you don't lose the series, you're letting the Braves back in. But this really is a case where there is some truth to it. I know that every series you play against the Braves has the same stakes. Totally get it. You play a 3-game series, it could be a 3-game swing in the standings. That is the truth in April just as much as it is in September. The reason that this feels a little bit different, and the reason that I'm actually a little bit willing to go slightly hyperbolic and say that the Phillies definitely need to win the series, which they've done 4 of their last 5. They had that split with the Marlins. The reason that they feel like they probably have to win the series is they're currently 9 games up on the Braves. And the Phillies have had an okay run, just over 500, 6-4 in their last 10. They did benefit that when they took on a couple of injuries, Schwarber, when they had the injury to Harper, the concern was the Braves could start to narrow the gap. And the Phillies did look like for a little bit there that they were going to run the risk of letting the Braves get back into this thing. Now, if you're the Phillies and you pull off a sweep and you end the weekend 12 games up on the Braves aren't all of a sudden just going to give up or roll over and die. But it is going to put a lot of doubt in their heads. If you win 2 out of 3 and you end up 11 games up on the Braves going into next week, you're totally fine. Everything is great. You cannot lose this series. Losing ground to the Braves could be borderline catastrophic. If you go down a no-show in Atlanta and you get swept, that 9-game lead becomes 6. And all of a sudden, the Braves, who have lost multiple critical players on their team, who lost Spencer Strider, you can't allow them to think they can get back into this. The trade deadline comes up in a few weeks. The last thing you want to do is go down and no-show or underperform significantly against the Braves. Because if you do, all of a sudden their front office starts to think, we have a legitimate chance to get back into this and to win the division. And it changes their entire mentality going into the deadline. Now, I think right now, if we were to sit in on a Braves front office meeting, they're probably still talking about it as the Phillies are vulnerable. All it'll take is 1 or 2 bad injuries. It's like if Harper takes longer to get back than expected, if something happens to a Wheeler where he goes out for a few weeks, or something happens to Nola, or Suarez and Sanchez come back down to earth, whatever it is, they can probably talk themselves into it right now that we can make a couple of acquisitions and we can get right back into this thing. And they probably still feel like at 9 games over 500, if they can't go after the NL East, they're still in contention to be a wild card team. You have the chance here, if you're the Phillies, to really not put your foot on their throat. It's not late enough in the season for you to take that definitive of a stance, but you have the ability right now to put significant doubt in the Braves' mind. You want to make sure that you can go into their house and walk away with a series win, because that just does a lot psychologically to a team, especially one that's trailing you and has been trailing you after entering the season thinking they were going to be the far and away best team in the NL East, in the Braves. If you lose this series and you allow the Braves to get back into this, it's not great. And especially given the fact that the Phillies have had injuries all year. There have been significant injuries that they have had to, work their way through. No season-ending ones, thankfully, to anybody of major importance. But you have to make sure that you leave Atlanta with, you would hope, a double-digit game lead in the NL East. Now, I'll go over to the comments here because Andrew Fawcett made a really good point before about Taijuan Walker, calling him the new Adam Eaton. That's brutal. Where were you when the Phillies signed Adam Eaton? I used to have that contract committed to memory. I think I've since allowed that to go from my brain. A lot of times with your brain, the way it works, sometimes you remember the most minute detail. You remember every little contract detail. You might remember how much cap space the Flyers had 3 years ago. But then somewhere along the line, you lose a little bit. Your brain can only hold so much. I used to have all these contracts committed to memory. And I don't know what it was. I don't know what part of my brain. Maybe it's just the lack of sleep and the overall stress of parenting that have cost me those details. Was it a $49 million deal to Adam Eaton? Does that sound right? 7 years? No, it couldn't have been 7 and 45. Was it 5 and 35? Somebody let me know. Fawcett says it was 3 years and $24 million. Okay. Wasn't as bad as I thought. Andrew also says, neither Walker nor Eaton pitched in the postseason. You have to remember, that was like the big strain on Taijuan Walker and the Phillies going into this year, is the fact that Walker was removed from the rotation late in the postseason. He thought he deserved to be a factor for this team and get to prove himself, and they said no, because at least they were smart in the playoffs. And yet they went back into the season expecting him to be a significant contributor. Kyle says that Walker can get thrown into whatever trade deadline deal they make. I just don't see a team wanting Taijuan Walker. The only kind of team that would want him at this point is a team that is convinced that the highest upside portion, like the number one thing that he brings to the table, which I've had explained to me a few times by some Phillies-related people, by some Phillies media, is that they view Taijuan Walker as an innings eater, which is fine. And I think if you're a really bad team, that's great to have. And if you're a really good team, you would like to have your innings eater at least have a chance to give you a win and not be erratic and not throw your bullpen into disarray. I don't know what team would ever want Taijuan Walker. It's entirely possible that you can convince a bottom-feeding team to take on that money and just have a guy who maybe for them could be their number 2 pitcher. And maybe if you're Taijuan Walker and you don't care about winning, you're fine to have this more critical role and to be at the top end of a rotation. But I have to imagine he wants to get back and he wants to prove himself and he wants to contribute to a team that very well could make a deep postseason run this year. But anyway, you have that series coming up this weekend. Let me know in the comments what you think. Where do you think the Phillies are going to end this weekend? Again, they're at a 9-game lead right now. Do they pull off a sweep? I wouldn't go there. I think they could win 2 of 3. If they only win 1 of 3, I'm concerned. If they get swept by the Braves, I will tell you right now that Tuesday's show, there are going to be a lot of sirens. There are going to be a lot of alarm bells. And if you don't like that early in the morning, you're just going to have to deal with it. All right, so that's it for the Phillies. I mentioned a little bit ago, there was a Flyers point, and then there was U.S. men's national team point, because for whatever reason, many people were very interested in thoughts on this on Tuesday, but let's go to the Flyers really quick. I had an issue earlier in this week because when free agency opened up, I did not expect the Flyers to be involved in anything of real value or meaning. I didn't expect the Flyers to say, hey, Matvei Michkov is coming over early. Let's try to convince Sam Reinhart to leave the Panthers and come be our 1C and give Michkov everything he needs to be successful from day one. I did not expect that. But I was a little bit concerned with the fact that the Flyers didn't wait until later in the offseason to make one of the moves they made. And I could even make the case that a second move they made is fine, but I still have questions. The first one is that they brought back Erik Johnson. Now, if you followed the Flyers last offseason, they waited a bit. They got Mark Stahl, I think just before the season started. I feel like they went dumpster diving right at the very end. And Mark Stahl was a guy who had played in a cup final. He was a guy who they viewed as a player who could bring significant leadership and, could help out a very inexperienced blue line. That although was going into a season where they thought they were going to have Rasmus Ristolainen healthy for the entire season. Travis Sanheim had been given that massive contract by Chuck Fletcher the year before. Like, there were a lot of different things at play. But they wanted the leadership that Mark Stahl could bring. But really, I think they were trying to 3D chess this thing. And they thought, if we bring in Mark Stahl, a playoff team is going to want to trade for him at the deadline. And that was all contingent on Mark Stahl had to at least play well enough to remain in the lineup in order for him to get enough games and in order to demonstrate that he is still a competent hockey player in order for him to be dealt at the deadline. Now, they did go into last year. That actually came up when we announced the partnership with the Flyers and Snow the goalie last year. I asked that of Keith Jones, I guess it was around training camp last year. And he said that ultimately Mark Stahl is going to get to choose what he does. If he wants to get dealt at the deadline, we'll do everything we can to deal him. And if he wants to stay, he'll stay. Okay, fine. Mark Stahl was whatever. I had no problem with him last year, except the head coach does this thing where he scratches the young guys for the sake of getting a vet in, even if that vet hasn't played particularly well. And Mark Stahl, for much of last season, did not play particularly well. There were times where I would question aloud why we weren't seeing more of Jennings and Adder together, where they had played a few good games together. I was like, why are the Flyers continuing to scratch one of those guys just to get Mark Stahl in the lineup? I had concerns, and I know that some people, they go back to it because I was concerned about this Erik Johnson signing, which I'm going to get to here in a second. But I understand why, as a team, you want to have a guy who brings veteran leadership, who could be your number 7 defenseman. And I would be fine if it were just about any other coach, and I can trust that the number 7 defenseman is going to be the number 7 defenseman. However, the coach you have in place is a guy who will do anything he can to try to win every game he can, which on the surface is good, but not when you're in a rebuild. And my concern was, yes, Mark Stahl only played 35 games last year, but there were multiple times that Mark Stahl was actually hurt, that he was actually injured and was unable to play. I think if he had his druthers, John Tortorella would have played Mark Stahl for more than 40 games last season. So that brings me to Erik Johnson. the Flyers go out last trade deadline, and it was around the time that they had dealt Sean Walker to Colorado. They didn't want to pay him what he thought he was going to make or what he thought he was valued at, and they ended up getting a first-round pick out of it. It's all great. That was a wonderful move. And they decided that they needed to make up for the loss of veteran leadership by bringing in Erik Johnson. And when Erik Johnson got here, I loved how candid he was. He essentially said, my best playing days are behind me. Okay, I like the honesty. I appreciate it. But Erik Johnson didn't look like an NHL caliber defenseman last year. Erik Johnson was, I would argue in a lot of ways, a net negative on the ice. You could throw plus minus at me. You can throw the eye test. You can throw advanced metrics at me. What I saw from Erik Johnson wasn't enough that made me say, yes, at the beginning of free agency, you should look to bring him back right away. I would have much rather the Flyers sit back and say, we're going to dumpster dive at the end of the offseason and we'll get whatever's out there. Now, if they really truly believe that Erik Johnson is like going to be a player coach and is legitimately going to be the seventh defenseman and play 25 games, maybe 30, fine. But I don't trust that's what's happening here. I truly don't. And so when you're in this rebuild, I would like to see some of the younger guys get a look. Now, the number one thing that people always come back to is,
I'd rather see these players get the opportunity to play at the AHL level and to get significant minutes in all situations for the Phantoms. That's better for their development.
And that's true to some extent. However, people in this organization know which guys they think are ultimately going to blossom into being legitimate players for this team over the next few years. But there are guys that play in the AHL that they have not really given up on, but they don't think have the ceiling that is worth the time to develop them and try to get them to play at the NHL level. I'm this psychotic human being, I guess, who sits back and says, if there's a player that you think has a chance, we want to get a look at this guy 5 games and see if he's worth a damn. I'd rather him be your seventh defenseman, travel with the team, practice with the team, and get actual opportunities than have a guy who can't really play anymore be there just for the leadership quality. And that's just me, and I'm nuts. I guess I'm crazy. But there are people who want to actively argue that, well, there's no downside to it. No, from a culture standpoint, there's no downside to having this guy as your seventh defenseman. There is a significant downside, though, in that I think he's going to, it's either going to be Erik Johnson or it's going to be an Erik Johnson adjacent player, somebody who's similar enough. Another one of these vets that they go out and maybe get later this offseason or they decide to trade for at some point. But those guys are going to actively take away opportunities from having some of these younger defensemen get a legitimate look. I don't want to see Igor Zamula in and out of the lineup. I want to see him play this year. I actually would like to see Adert and Jennings play more together this year. I'd like to see them have the opportunity to try to grow and develop together because that's the entire point of a rebuild. I would love to see Rasmus Ristolainen get traded away to free up another spot because, again, if you're doing a rebuild, the whole point is to try to see what your young guys have. And sometimes you get lucky and you find somebody that you think had no upside who makes it to the big show and they end up playing well, and all of a sudden it's like found money. I just don't get it. I feel sometimes like I'm taking crazy pills because I want to see young guys play in a rebuild. And I still think that there are enough veterans on this team that can serve the veteran leadership role that you don't have to go out of your way and make a play for an Erik Johnson or another guy like Erik Johnson. And they have to waste the opportunities, waste the minutes. I just don't get it. I don't like it. All right, I'm done. Andrew says, by the way, true. And Landro says, I don't know if he means I'm confused or if he was getting it with somebody in the comments. Let me go back to the comments here for a second, because we have a bunch of people up here in the Flyers side of things. Let's see. Landros asked about the offseason. It's been very quiet, very disappointing, which we're going to get to there in a second. Andrew Fawcett says, Jennings scores his first goal and didn't see the ice the rest of the season. I think he got back in the lineup one more time. But I remember when they went to go play against the Panthers, and they were in Florida, and Adert and Jennings played together, and they played really, really well together. And then I think they got one more game together the rest of the season. And I was like, what are we doing? Like, I get that sometimes you look at it and you say, like, all right, maybe it was a one-game fluke. I want to see that in a rebuild. let these guys prove that either they can play at this level or they can't, but don't take their opportunities away because of culture. And give a shit about your culture. Your culture sucked for a decade. Your team as a whole has mostly sucked for a decade, maybe longer. You had one really good, cool run to the Stanley Cup that came down to the last day of the regular season. And you went on a magical run, and it was fantastic. And maybe that was also part of, why people thought that they were closer than they were. And guess you lost Chris Pronger eventually to a horrible injury that shouldn't have happened, and it changed the trajectory. I get it. But, the culture only goes so far. This front office keeps saying publicly and privately, we need more top-end talent. You can't have that and do what you did a year ago where you're a purgatory team. I said this on Tuesday. I'm going to say it a million more times. You can't do it. It's not how this works. There's a reason that teams don't compete and get high picks and rebuild at the same time. It doesn't work. All right, let's see. Kyle says, this season is a throwaway other than seeing Mishkov. I hope they take a step back. They need a top pick. I 100% agree with that. And listen, I like going down and covering this team. I do. I enjoy it. I enjoy going down and doing the Press Row show. Not because I love... It's different. It's different now than what I used to do. I used to go down in the locker room, used to talk to these players, get better context on things, and feel more like I was in the know about what was going on in the locker room. And that was valuable to a point as somebody who was writing about the team at the time. I enjoy doing the Press Row show because we have so many people who come up to us at a game and tell us how much the show means to them and how much they enjoy it. And you get to talk to the people because right now I talk to this camera, I talk to all of you, I interact with you through the comments, but we don't have the face-to-face interaction. There's something really nice about that. I work from home, so I don't talk to people that much. I talk to my wife and my kids and sometimes our friends, but it's not the same as being in an office or back in the days of teaching and running into people and you talk to 200 people a day or something. It's a little bit different. So maybe that's what it is. I've covered bad teams. I had to sit through that 2018 season where they fired Hextall and Hextall. I've been there. I'm fine with going down and covering a bad team and trying to piece the whole thing together and figure it out. I'm okay with it. All right. I'm not if the team sucks and it's all in the goal of trying to get a top pick, I'm fine. Mishkov deserves to have a good player centering his line, though. And that, I think, is really where they have a problem. Because I don't know where Tortorella is going to pencil him in. I imagine that Konechny is going to be on the top line and Mishkov is going to be on the second line, and I don't know who the center is going to be there. And the idea that you might have Morgan Frost centering that line only for Torts to do the thing where he pulls. I don't want to see Mishkov get jerked around. I actually want to see him be put in position to be successful. And if it means that he's on a line with Sean Couturier, and that's just what you do for the whole season, I'm fine with it. Just figure it out. Don't tank the kid who came over early and who's your best player, your best prospect, who could blossom into being your best player if all things go well. Let's see. And then I guess that's where we get back to this message about the mixed messaging, because I think that the front office is saying one thing and sometimes their actions are doing an entirely different thing. That's where we're at. Andrew Fawcett says, after listening to Nick Schultz pressers, I hope he gets an opportunity to be more than a developmental coach. I'm not entirely sure about that. I've heard some very mixed responses to what Nick Schultz has done so far since being brought back into the organization. Landry says, culture is great when you win. I agree. Linda Joseph says, that saw you here in the Philly area was Ant disagreeing. Agreed with Russ on this. Ant and Bundy and I on Snow the Goalie, we have very different opinions on what this team should be, could be, all that. I will contend pretty consistently that I think, and I'm pretty right about this, but I think that the mentality that Ant has is in line with what made the Flyers a mediocre team for a decade. And that their unwillingness to really tear down all the way and build this thing up the right way is going to prove to be really problematic. And then if they have another season this year like they did last year, where they end up with a purgatory pick, which not only sucks to be a purgatory pick, but also makes it harder for you to get up to where the elite talent is, as we saw this year potentially with Demidov, I think you screwed up. if they have another season where they're flirting with the playoffs again, I'm going to actively say they screwed this thing up. It's not a rebuild at that point. We'll see. Andrew says that he's concerned about the TK situation about Konechny. I am as well. I've heard a few different things. I do think that there are people in the front office who are more in line with my line of thinking. Maybe not about a trade, but about what the value of Konechny should be. That he's probably like an $8 million player. Maybe 8.5. You certainly can't pay him over 9. You just can't. And that if there are people who are going to advocate for it, they're out of their minds. Andrew says that maybe Frost or Paling is going to center. It's possible. What they'll probably do. This is actually my guess now. I think that they would put Mishkov with Scott Lawton centering a line, because they would say that Lawton is a more responsible two-way center than Frost is, and that they would be worried that if Frost and Mishkov played together, Mishkov would pick up a lot of bad tendencies that they would claim that Frost has, that he gets lost in his own end and isn't back to help defensively. That's my guess. I could be wrong. And then Landros, last thing here on the Flyers before we move on to the last topic for the day, says Konechny has a $9 million second-line right wing behind Mishkov. Is that a dumb contract coming? Yes, that would be a bad contract. And I know that it all comes out in the wash because Mishkov is on an ELC. Konechny is your best player, and he needs to get paid, all that crap. Just because you think you have to pay a player doesn't mean you have to. Just because somebody else might be willing to pay a player a premium doesn't mean you have to. We can actually kind of go full circle here, sort of. The Giants didn't think that Saquon Barkley was worth $12 million a year. They didn't just sign him to that contract just for funsies so that no one else could have him. They didn't sign him to that contract because they didn't want to tie their hands with what they could do with the rest of the team. Again, the Giants really suck, and it doesn't really matter, and the cap situations are very different between the NFL and NHL. But they made that calculation, and he went off to a division rival. The Flyers at least control, to some extent, what they could do with Konechny. If they can't come to terms on a deal, or if they are vastly far apart, they could have a conversation about trading him and getting assets, which I would be entirely for. I think that ultimately, if you're not going to pay him what he might think he's worth, which might be in excess of $9 million a year, I think that you start a bidding war. There are a lot of teams, including very good teams, that would likely want to go out and get a guy like Konechny who could be a 30-goal scorer, who can be tenacious, who can be a pain in the ass, who can get under the opposition's skin, who's going to leave nothing on the table, right? Like, he gives you everything he has every night. There are a lot of teams that would love to have a guy like that. I think if the Flyers actually did start a bidding war, I think if they opened it up, if it became known that they were open to trading Travis Konechny, you would get a massive haul. At the very least, you would get something that you got for Claude Giroux. You would get a first-round pick, and you would get a change of scenery player. I think ultimately what you should want if you're going to trade your best player in Konechny is at least one first, another that's like a conditional that could be a first. Maybe you want to fight for 2. I don't know if he's a 2 first-round pick player, and you want to get a change of scenery guy. The idea was brought up on Tuesday about like, hey, how about Shane Wright in a first from Seattle? There's your pick. There's your change of scenery guy. Maybe. We'll see. So there's a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff going on there in Flyers land. Now, the last thing I wanted to get to is something that we kind of touched on really briefly on Tuesday. And it's interesting because Jürgen Klopp, who I have advocated for as being men's national team coach, well, he flirted with the U.S. fans a little bit, just a little bit, maybe more than a little bit. Jürgen Klopp went on to Instagram on the 4th of July. I'm going to see if I can find it here really quick because it was next level by Klopp. He shouted out the U.S. fans, and in doing so, made all of soccer Twitter kind of collapse in on itself. I'm trying to pull this up, and it looks like it's not going to let... because I have an Instagram Live going. I guess that's why. Okay, fine. I should be able to get it. Here we go. So Jürgen Klopp goes on to Instagram on the 4th of July, and he puts something out that gets the attention, we'll say, of the U.S. soccer fan base. I'm going to throw it up here on the screen. I'm not worried about YouTube taking down a stream because of an Instagram post, but here we go. So Klopp goes on to Instagram and he posts the following. It's the perfect day to think about my trips with Liverpool to the States. We've had a great time, and the U.S. fans are electric. Happy 4th of July. Now, on the surface, you might look at that and say, well, who cares? That's not him saying that he wants to coach the men's national team. That's not him saying that he's even interested in coaching the men's national team. Now, I'm not going to go back through his entire Instagram history. All right, I'm not going to do that. Somebody else can do that if they want. Do we know if he wished the entire United States of America a happy 4th of July 1 year ago? Do we know that? I don't think he did. I'm just looking to see. Maybe he didn't even have an Instagram back that far. So maybe we'll never know. Now, I did see that there were some people out there who had a concern or a thought that perhaps Klopp could be going to Miami because Beckham wants him to manage that team. If David Beckham costs, there's a very strong chance that Jürgen Klopp has no interest in the U.S. job. Okay, there is also a significant chance that the U.S. Soccer Federation, is too stupid or too egocentric, too narcissistic to allow this guy to come in and overhaul things. I actually think that could be a bigger problem, that U.S. soccer wants Klopp less than Klopp wants the U.S., because he's going to hold people accountable, and that might cost some of them their jobs or make their jobs a lot less cushy. If Beckham puts a seed of doubt into the head of Klopp, if Klopp actually is considering the men's national team job, if he's starting to mull it over and U.S. soccer is open to it, and David Beckham swoops in and gets Klopp to go manage Miami, which I don't think will happen, but if he does, we have to deport David Beckham. That's it. I don't make the rules. But if David Beckham costs the U.S. men's national team the chance to have Jürgen Klopp come in and manage this team and build this team leading into the 2026 World Cup that you're going to host, have to hashtag deport Beckham. Again, I don't make the rules. I'm just here so I won't get fined. That's the end of our show today. I want to thank everybody who joined live on YouTube. You can go follow this show. Some of you are subscribed to and you follow and you're watching right now on the @JoyMedia LLC account over on YouTube. Some of you have found your way to the new YouTube channel @The Russ Joy Show. Make sure, if you haven't done so already, you go subscribe over there. Ring the bell so you get notified whenever I go live with a show. Again, this show is going to be Tuesdays and Fridays, at least up until football season, 8 a.m. Eastern. You can go follow the show on Twitter @The Russ Joy Show. You can follow me on Twitter @JoyOnBroad. I want to thank everybody again for joining me. A big thank you to everybody, by the way, who has now subscribed to the podcast feed and is getting this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, Amazon Music, wherever they get their podcasts. Do me a favor, as you go into this weekend, let 2 people, just 2, it could be 4, it could be 10, but at least 2 people, let them know about this show. Let them know you decide to join me every morning at 8 a.m. on Tuesdays and Fridays, or you decide to listen in the podcast feed. Share this show and let people know about the Russ Joy Show. I want to thank all of you again, and I will talk to you, well, I'll probably talk to some of you at least, on Snow the Goalie at some point. I will definitely talk to some of you later today on Crossing Broadcast, talk to some of you on Monday's Crossing Broadcast, but in the meantime, if the next time I talk to you is Tuesday, I hope this show brought a little bit of joy to your day. And Kyle, I want to wish you the same. You have a nice weekend as well. Thanks again, everybody who supported the show, and I will talk to all of you on Tuesday here on The Russ Joy Show. Have a great weekend, everybody.